Welcome back to Coins Numismatic Series, where a coin that looks like an ordinary 1-cent piece can sometimes hide a mistake worth thousands, a wartime story worth remembering, or a variety that collectors have spent decades searching for. Today, we are going straight into the top 3 rarest and most interesting 1944, 1945, and 1946 wheat penny varieties that can still surprise collectors, especially when found in circulated or otherwise normal condition. Here are 3 coins that deserve a much closer look. 1944 Steel Wheat Penny. The 1944 Steel Wheat Penny is the spectacular rarity of this group, and its story begins with one of the most unusual transitions in American coinage history. In 1943, the United States Mint abandoned the traditional bronze composition for the Lincoln cent and began striking cents on zinc-coated steel planchets. The reason was wartime conservation. Copper was critically important for ammunition, electrical equipment, communications, and other military applications, so the Mint experimented with a substitute composition. Then came 1944, and the normal Lincoln cent returned to a predominantly copper composition. A regular 1944 Lincoln cent weighs approximately 3.11 grams and was struck on the familiar copper-based planchet. But somehow, a very small number of leftover 1943 steel planchets found their way into the 1944 production stream. When those steel blanks were struck with 1944 Lincoln cent dies, the result was something the Mint never intended to create. A 1944 steel wheat cent NGC describes these pieces as transitional errors and explains that leftover steel planchets could have remained in Mint facilities and accidentally entered the production process when copper cents were being struck again. This is where the coin becomes extraordinary. A normal 1944 cent is copper-colored or brown depending on its condition and toning, while a genuine 1944 steel cent has the silvery appearance associated with the 1943 steel cents. More importantly, the physical specifications can expose the difference. A genuine steel example should weigh about 2.70 grams rather than the approximately 3.11 grams of the regular copper cent, and it should respond to a magnet because of its steel composition. But collectors need to be extremely careful here, because altered and counterfeit pieces exist, including copper cents that have been manipulated to imitate steel errors. Authentication by a major grading service is essential before treating an unusual example as genuine. The rarity is astonishing. PCGS records only a handful of demonstrably different 1944 D steel cents, while NGC notes that genuine 1944 steel cents exist from Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia examples are more numerous than the Denver and San Francisco pieces, but all are major rarities compared with the ordinary 1944 Lincoln cent. The 1944 S steel cent is especially famous because only a tiny number are known, and this is where the market value becomes completely different from an ordinary wheat penny. A circulated normal 1944 Lincoln cent may be worth only a modest amount, while a genuine 1944 steel cent can command tens of thousands of dollars even without being in pristine condition. NGC's current information places circulated examples in the tens of thousands of dollars, while exceptional specimens can move far higher. Auction history has produced extraordinary results, including a 1944 S steel cent selling for $408,000 in an advanced mint state grade. A 1944 D steel cent has also achieved 6-figure auction results. For a collector examining a normal condition coin, the first lesson is simple. Do not rely on appearance alone. Test the weight, observe the color, and examine the coin carefully, but remember that a magnet test by itself does not prove authenticity. The date must be correct, the surfaces must be examined for alteration, and professional authentication becomes extremely important when serious money is involved. The historical appeal is just as strong as the financial appeal. This tiny coin represents the chaotic transition between 2 wartime compositions. It is physical evidence of how enormous American wartime production had become and how difficult it was to control every blank, die, and production batch perfectly. That is why collectors are fascinated by the 1944 steel wheat penny. It is not simply a scarce cent. It is an accidental survivor from a major chapter in American monetary history. So if you ever encounter a 1944 wheat penny that looks silver instead of copper, stop before spending it. Check the weight. Check whether it reacts to a magnet. Inspect the date and surfaces. And if the evidence looks convincing, do not clean it, polish it, scrape it, or experiment with it. Put it aside and have it professionally authenticated. A coin that looks like an ordinary wartime cent could potentially be one of the most important wheat penny discoveries in your collection. 1945 Doubled Die Obverse Wheat Penny. The 1945 Lincoln Wheat Penny takes us into a completely different kind of rarity. Unlike the dramatic 1944 steel cent, the 1945 variety does not announce itself with a silver-colored appearance or an unusual metal composition. Instead, its story is hidden in the design itself, and collectors need a trained eye and magnification to recognize what happened. The regular 1945 Lincoln cent was struck in enormous numbers. Philadelphia alone produced 1,040,515,000 cents that year, making the basic 1945 Philadelphia issue a very common surviving wheat penny. It used the standard copper-based composition of the period, weighed about 3.11 grams, measured 19 millimeters across, and carried Victor David Brenner's familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse. The reverse featured the classic pair of wheat ears surrounding the denomination and United States of America. That enormous mintage is exactly what makes the rare variety so interesting. The date itself is not scarce. What collectors want is the specific die variety known as the 1945 Doubled Die Obverse, or DDOFS 101. A doubled die is created during the die-making process, rather than when an individual coin is accidentally struck twice. The working die receives a doubled impression during its preparation, and every coin struck from that die can carry the resulting design distortion. That distinction is important because a genuine doubled die is a variety of the die itself, while ordinary machine doubling can occur during the striking process and usually has a different appearance and a much lower numismatic significance. On the 1945 DDOFS 101, collectors examine the obverse for evidence of doubling in the lettering and design elements. The variety is recognized by specialists and cataloged by PCGS as a legitimate 1945 Lincoln cent die variety. PCGS lists the DDOFS 101 in brown, and red designations, confirming that the variety exists across different levels of copper preservation. This is exactly the type of coin that can fool a casual collector. In normal circulated condition, the doubling may not look dramatic. Where it can flatten the design, dirt can obscure the secondary impression, and toning can make small details harder to see. That means collectors should not make a decision from a quick glance. A good loupe or microscope, strong directional lighting, in comparison with a normal 1945 cent can make a major difference. The value story is equally interesting. A regular circulated 1945 Philadelphia wheat penny is generally a modest value coin because of its huge production, but the recognized DDO variety can carry a substantial premium. PCGS records an auction result of $1,410 for a 1945 DDOFS 101 graded MS64 brown, while another certified red example has a recorded auction result of $395 at MS64 red. These numbers show how dramatically a specific die variety can separate itself from the ordinary date. But there is an important point about value in normal condition. Do not assume that every circulated 1945 cent with apparent doubling is automatically worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. Genuine attribution matters. Many old coins show mechanical doubling, die deterioration, strike weakness, or other effects that can resemble a doubled die to an inexperienced eye. The market pays for recognized varieties, not simply for anything that looks doubled. The historical background adds another layer to the story. The 1945 cent was produced during the final year of World War II, and the United States was still operating under the pressures of wartime manufacturing. Millions upon millions of coins were required to support an economy operating at an extraordinary level of industrial activity. By the end of the year, the war was moving toward its conclusion, and the Lincoln cent was about to enter the post-war era. Yet the coins produced during this period were not all identical in their production characteristics. Die varieties such as the 1945 DDO remind us that mass production could still create small but collectible anomalies. Collectors are particularly attracted to this variety because it offers something different from a spectacular wrong planchet error. You do not need a silver-colored coin sitting obviously apart from the others. The treasure is hidden in the design. That makes the 1945 DDO a classic cherry picker's coin, something that can potentially be identified by careful examination rather than simply purchased because it is already famous. So if you have a jar, box, roll, or old album containing 1945 wheat pennies, do not skip over the common Philadelphia pieces simply because more than 1 billion were struck. Take your time with the obverse. Look closely at the lettering, especially the areas associated with the recognized DDO characteristics, and compare what you see against reliable variety references. If the doubling appears convincing, preserve the coin exactly as you found it, and consider professional attribution. That is the great lesson of the 1945 wheat penny. Rarity is not always about the date. Sometimes the date is common, the coin looks ordinary, and the real value is hidden inside a tiny variation created decades ago at the mint. 1946, S/D Over Mintmark Wheat Penny. The third coin brings us into the fascinating world of Over Mintmarks, where one letter from the mint's production process can transform an otherwise ordinary wheat penny into a collectible variety. The coin to watch is the 1946 S/D Lincoln Wheat Cent, specifically the FS 511 Over Mintmark variety. To understand why this matters, remember that the United States Mint operated multiple facilities, including Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia cents carried no mint mark, Denver coins carried a D, and San Francisco coins carried an S. On the 1946 S/D variety, traces of one mint mark remain beneath another, creating a visible record of an earlier stage of die preparation. PCGS catalogs the 1946 S/D FS 511 as an Over Mintmark variety of the 1946 S Lincoln Cent. The regular 1946 S issue had a mintage of 198,100,000 coins, considerably lower than the nearly 1 billion Philadelphia cents produced that year. The standard 1946 S cent used a copper-based composition, weighed about 3.11 grams, and carried the familiar wheat reverse design for the Lincoln Cent series. The remarkable feature is the mint mark. Under magnification, the collector can see remnants of the underlying D beneath or around the S. This is not simply a random scratch or damage. It is a die variety created during the preparation of the working die, and the remnants of the earlier mint mark are part of the coin's identity. The FS 511 designation is important because it allows collectors, dealers, and grading services to distinguish the recognized variety from other unusual-looking mint marks. PCGS lists the 1946 S/D FS 511 in brown, red-brown, and red versions, showing that the variety can appear with different levels of original copper color and preservation. For someone searching coins in normal condition, this is a particularly exciting variety because the underlying mint mark can sometimes remain visible even after years of circulation. However, what can make the attribution difficult? The mint mark area should be examined under magnification and compared with certified examples. Collectors should be especially careful not to confuse damage, tooling, or an altered mint mark with a genuine Over Mintmark. The value can be dramatically higher than that of an ordinary circulated 1946 S wheat penny, although the premium depends heavily on grade, color designation, eye appeal, and authentication. PCGS records a $341 auction result for an FS 511 example graded MS63 red-brown, while a brown example has a recorded result of $3,181 in MS67 brown. Those results demonstrate an important principle of numismatics: rarity and grade interact. The same variety can have a completely different market position depending on preservation. For a normal condition example, collectors should therefore avoid quoting a single universal price. A circulated specimen might command a premium over an ordinary 1946 S cent, but the actual amount depends on whether the variety is conclusively attributed, how much of the Over Mintmark remains visible, and what the market is paying at the time of sale. A certified high-grade example belongs to a very different market category. The historical setting makes the 1946 issue especially interesting. This was the first full year after World War II had ended. American industry was transitioning away from wartime production, millions of servicemen were returning home, and the economy was moving into a dramatically different post-war environment. The Lincoln cent was also returning to a more conventional peacetime production landscape after years of wartime experimentation. The 1946 cent therefore sits at an important historical crossroads. It belongs to the wheat penny era, but it was produced after the emergency conditions that had created the famous steel cent experiment. And that is why the 1946 S/D variety is such a compelling collector coin. It does not require a spectacular metal error to tell a story. Instead, the story is embedded in a tiny mint mark. One letter was placed over another, and decades later collectors can still see evidence of that manufacturing decision. When searching for one in ordinary condition, use magnification and good lighting. Focus on the mint mark rather than simply looking at the date. Compare the shape and position of the S with known FS 511 diagnostics. If you believe you have discovered a genuine example, do not clean the coin in an attempt to reveal the mint mark. Cleaning can destroy surfaces and reduce collector appeal. Preserve the coin and seek an expert opinion or professional certification if the variety appears convincing. So, when you hear someone say that a wheat penny is only worth 1 cent because it is old and circulated, remember these 3 dates. A 1944 can conceal a legendary steel transitional error. A 1945 can hide a recognized doubled die variety inside an otherwise common date. And a 1946 S can carry the remnants of an Over Mintmark that turns an ordinary-looking cent into a genuine numismatic variety. The greatest discoveries are not always the coins that look spectacular from across the room. Sometimes they are the coins that force you to stop, pick up a magnifier, and ask one simple question. What exactly happened at the mint when this little piece of copper was made? That question is at the heart of coin collecting, and it is exactly why these wheat pennies remain so fascinating today.